Good morning. Glad you could join us. Hey, do you want to hear a bad joke? Okay, you said yes. So we're going to talk about Jonah today. So there's some street preacher. I've got a couple guesses as to who it was. It was, I think, in the beginning of the 19th century, but I'm not sure who it was. But he's out there preaching about Jonah, like I'm going to be in just a few moments. And he's got a heckler out there, and the guy's just like, how do you know this story's true? Do you really believe this whole thing about Jonah being in the fish? And he says he does. And he goes, how can you prove it? And the preacher says, I can't prove it. He said, but when I get to heaven, I'll talk to him about it one day. And the heckler says, yeah, well, what if Jonah's not in heaven? And the preacher says, well, then you can ask him about it. I told you it was a bad joke in a different kind of way, right? So Jonah, you talk about irony, he's a missionary, he's a prophet. And what does he do? God says, oh, go speak to the people in Nineveh. And what does he do? He runs. He runs away. He ends up on a ship. And when he's on the ship, this bad storm comes along. He just doesn't want to go to the mission field. I mean, he's a missionary. Do you know why he didn't want to go? See, I could understand not wanting to go if I thought, oh, I won't be successful. They won't believe my message. No, he actually was upset when they did believe his message and they repented. So he was kind of a messed up dude. But you know what? The moral of this story is that God still gets things done. And this is something I never caught before, but I picked up from James Montgomery Boyce from his book, Come to the Waters. So he's on the boat, and the sailors there respond to him. And it says in chapter 1, verse 16, it said, the sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Well, earlier, let's just go through this whole thing. In verse 5, it says there's three things that they feared. The first one, in verse 5, was they feared the storm. Because God sent this storm to kind of rough up Jonah. He was, trying to get his attention. Maybe not rough him up. The second was that the disclosure that Jonah was a Hebrew who worshiped Jehovah. When they found that out, they're kind of like, we've got our gods that we worship and sacrifice to and stuff, but we've heard this is the one that we don't want to mess with. Okay? And so... And then it was in verse 10 that they were said that they feared Jehovah himself. And then we find out in verse 16, they feared the Lord exceedingly. So the storm stopped when they threw Jonah overboard. They're just like, we really hate to do this, but we think this is what we're supposed to do. They had more respect for God than Jonah did. But what happened, it's really amazing, is that even though Jonah's running from God, and he's not preaching to these guys, God is working circumstances through Jonah's disobedience. Now, I'm not encouraging that, but that's pointing these men towards the Lord. And so, very interesting. They come to him it's one thing, okay, God, if you deliver us, then we'll respond. They already were delivered. And because of what they witnessed, they worshiped God, they made vows to God, and they made a sacrifice to God. So they go from pagans to followers of the one true God. All of this in response to Jonah doing everything wrong. This speaks to the sovereignty of God. Sometimes you look at the world around you and say, God, how are you going to get your purposes done? We don't have enough people, we don't have enough resources. God is fully capable of accomplishing what he wants to accomplish on earth. Pray, but much more. Cooperate with God. When Jonah finally does cooperate with the Lord, great things happened in Nineveh. Offer yourself to be used by the Lord today. Present yourself before him. God, may you be glorified in our hearts, in our lives, in our world today. And may it not be through our disobedience, but our agreeing with you. Have a great day. Have a great week.